This is an unabridged fan read of A Good War by Robert Brooks, read by Christian Karstrom. Part 4. Victory at Darkshore. A hand squeezed Sourfang's shoulder. "We've arrived, High Overlord," Morka said. He was awake instantly.
"How bad is the fighting?"
Morka shook her head. "Already done." Sourfang hopped off the cart and squinted upward. The sun was still low in the sky, so he hadn't slept for long. Perhaps 15 minutes. After days of fighting, that was a luxury. It would not lift the weight of fatigue that hung over his mind, but it refreshed his thoughts. A lake lay before him. An island was in the middle of it, splitting the waters nearly in two, and upon that split of land stood a small Kaldrai village, Astronar, one of the last Night Elf strongholds on the way to the coast. Water on all sides, only 2 bridges allowing access, perfect as a staging ground. If the Night Elves had already lost it, that was an astonishing victory for the Horde.
"Didn't they defend Astronar?"
Sourfang asked. Morka shrugged. "The Night Elves were dead before we got here. Our scouts say the bodies show signs of poison. Our infiltrators must have been productive."
"Impressive."
Sourfang would need to learn which rogues had done such a thorough job.
"Sweep the town one more time for saboteurs, and then bring everything to the inn. Astronar is the last command post we need to secure Ashenvale," he said.
Perhaps he would even get to sleep in a bed for a few minutes, instead of a wooden cart rolling over a bumpy path. It was quiet as a battlefield could be. Sylvanas Windrunner was concealed in a large thicket of trees several miles ahead of the Horde's front lines, hunting for Malfurion Stormrage, but she could hear the sounds of hundreds of different skirmishes far away. The shouts of victories, the cries of the dying, they all sounded the same from a distance. The formless scream of war. Sylvanas ignored it. She was hunting bigger prey, if she could find his trail again. Malfurion Stormrage was playing the game better than expected. He had not let himself become cornered. For days he had struck the Horde hard, tearing their ranks asunder, and then faded back into the forest before Sylvanas could catch more than a glimpse of him. He was not letting anger drive his actions, but it would change nothing about the outcome of this battle. He had to know that. Where would he be now, if not here? Sylvanas worried away at the problem while she watched the forest around her. Here. Right here. It was quiet. The sort of silence that only came from death. Dozens of the slain surrounded her, every one of them Horde. "In the end, death claims us all," Sylvanas Windrunner whispered to them. A faint eulogy, but there was no words to ease what they had suffered before their ends. Sylvanas had seen death in every form and circumstance. Bodies told a story. The evidence of the fallen's horror was written in the footsteps that had crushed grass and leaves, and the soil that had been disturbed by roots leaping out of the ground to snare arms and legs, and, of course, in the scorched earth that marked where they had died. A group of Night Elves, most, but not all, had been druids or magi, had been hiding in the depths of this thicket. When the pack of Horde troops passed by, the Kaldrai had unleashed arrows, magic, blades, and every other instrument of war, wounding almost the entire raiding party. All 30 of them had been brought down within seconds. The druids had called upon nature to subdue most of them. The magi had trapped a few in ice. Perhaps 1 or 2 had died quickly. The rest of them had been helpless, in pain, but alive. And only then had the killing truly begun. These Horde soldiers had not died in a flash of fire. they had burned slowly, in agony, screaming. The Night Elves had done everything they could to prolong the horror, to maximize the pain. Malfurion would be very upset to see what his people have done, Sylvanas thought. The wound is open. The bleeding has begun, but they used their hatred in such pitiful ways. The Kaldorei knew they were outnumbered. They knew their homeland was lost. Maybe a few of them knew in their hearts, just as she knew, that Darnassus would one day burn to ashes. All they could do, in their rage, was to make these poor souls suffer. They had used their power not to win battle or buy time for their people's evacuation, but to inflict pain and nothing else. Their fury had stripped away every civilized pretense, every semblance of honor, and they had shown who they truly were. That was what war did. That was what it was for. To give civilized beings permission to do the unthinkable. Only then could you achieve the impossible. Sylvanas had learned that the hard way. Too many others probably never could. Malfurion, even in his rage over the inevitable, he was not losing his composure. Perhaps he could not. And that is why he will lose. Would Saurfang ever understand that? He had glimpsed the same abyss she had. His son, Dranosh, had been a bedrock of honor, but that hadn't mattered a whit when death came for him. Saurfang had watched as his son danced on the Lich King's puppet strings. That day had wounded Saurfang's soul. Even he believed he had been broken. Sylvanas had privately suspected he would never return to war, but he had. The wound had not healed. He simply learned to live with it. Now he seemed to imagine that honor would sustain him to the end of his days. Honor was all Saurfang had left. Honor and the Horde. She did not know what he would do if either were taken from him. He would become an enemy. A terrible one. Fortunately for him, honor and restraint were exactly what she needed now. Perhaps he would find a glorious death on the battlefield before he had to face a choice that would destroy him. Or maybe the orc will surprise me, she thought. Maybe he will face the world as it is and choose to fight onward at my side. If he doesn't, well, that can wait. Malfurion had been on the northern border of Ashenvale for a while, and then he had traveled south. Sylvanas was certain of it. For some reason, he had not passed by this thicket. What had drawn his attention? There weren't many possibilities. There were no sounds of battle to the south. Astronar was that way. It wouldn't have been a war zone. If it was not, that was by design. She left the thicket, traveling south. Her instincts were calling her to Astronar. The battle was coming to its end. Saurfang knew it. The Horde knew it. The Night Elves seemed to know it, for they were fighting more desperately than ever. Saurfang leaned over the largest table in the inn's common room, carefully studying the map of Ashenvale with his tacticians. His subordinates had already marked the most recent Horde movements and Alliance sightings on the map. The front lines had jumped ahead on the southern end, but the northern side was catching up quickly. Malfurion had rippled hard into the Horde in the north, but reinforcements had arrived to replace their losses. On the map, it seemed that the Night Elves' last dregs of resistance in Ashenvale were crumbling under an avalanche of wax markings. There were no known Night Elf strongholds remaining, not from the northern barrens to Astronar. The Kaldorei had roving scouts who took every opportunity to sow chaos behind the Horde's lines, but that was a minor concern. The supply routes were well guarded, and the front lines had enough supplies to push to Darnassus in any case. "We've taken Ashenvale." He did not say so out loud. Best not to tempt fate, especially when he wasn't sure he believed it. The victory had come too easily. And still, Ashenvale was not the final objective. It was just the biggest piece of the puzzle. Sourfang's fingers traced along the coastline, from the edge of Ashenvale to Darkshore, where the Horde would launch their attack on Darnassus itself.
"We need to begin preparations for the final push,"
he said.
"No stopping until Darkshore?"
asked an orc.
"We'll anchor ourselves on the coastline to the south."
Saurfang tapped on a location not far away, Soramgar Outpost. The Horde hadn't used it much since Hellscream had been disposed. It was a good place to regroup.
"There's a clearing from Ashenvale to the beach. The Night Elf won't challenge us in the open. We can take the coast easily."
"The Night Elf fleet may return soon," said a Blood Elf. "If we're lucky, they are days away, but they may return from Feralas as soon as this afternoon. We could be exposed to their fire on the beach."
"If the fleet bombards us instead of evacuating the rest of their citizens..."
Saurfang trailed off. That was exactly what the fleet would do, wasn't it? Those ships would evacuate plenty of Night Elves from the World Tree, but they wouldn't have time to load them aboard. More civilians would escape if the fleet slowed down the Horde instead of trying to assist the evacuation.
"You're right. How many siege weapons do we have left?"
That prompted some discussion. After the tacticians compared information, they reported that the Night Elves had managed to destroy or damage about half of the Horde's siege weapons. That was more than Saurfang would have liked, but not a disaster. They were the most important target for the Night Elves after all. If the Horde could not put siege engines in Darkshore, there would be no covering barrage for the assault on the World Tree itself.
"But we still have enough. More than enough."
Saurfang rattled off more orders.
"Bring the siege weapons here. They will be safe until we have the shore."
Over the next hour, the weapons and their crews rolled into town and parked along the central path through Astronar. Saurfang scarcely noticed as he stared at the table, watching his subordinates draw new information onto the maps. Someone unrolled the map of the ocean between Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms and marked the progress of Alliance reinforcements. Their fleet was still days away. Too far to make a difference. There was still a long way for the Horde to go, Saurfang reminded himself. A long way. It would require a lot of killing and dying, but the strategy that had gotten them this far would carry them all the way to the western coast. The fighting had taken a rhythm that the Night Elves could not stop. Saurfang's armies moved forward in small groups until they faced resistance, and then they stood fast. The Night Elves only had the numbers to hold the line in 1 or 2 locations. Malfurion was a front all on his own, but Sylvanas was on his heels, daring him to rest long enough for her to catch him. Every other part of the offensive would push forward. If the Night Elves pulled back, they would be harried by Horde scouts. If they held position, they would be quickly surrounded. The Horde did not need to break the Night Elves' defenses, not when they could go around them. That made it seem clean and easy, of course. War was neither of those things. There had been plenty of instances where Horde soldiers had pushed forward into an ambush. Malfurion struck hard all across the Horde's lines, killing those foolish enough to charge into battle with him. When the final numbers were tallied, there would be more slain Horde than Kaldorei. But Saurfang had anticipated that. He didn't like it, but when you threatened an enemy's home and invaded their land, you paid a certain price. If this is the cost of ending the next war before it truly begins, it is worth it. A messenger arrived at the inn, a Forsaken, bearing the mark of the war chief's personal honor guard. High Overlord Saurfang. Outside. Now. Saurfang turned a scathing eye toward him only for a moment. This one needs to learn respect. Then he turned his attention to the maps.
Deliver your message and get out.
The war chief is waiting for you. Do you not follow our commands, High Overlord? the undead man asked. If Saurfang had spoken like this to his first war chief, Blackhand, his head would have been lopped off his shoulders. But he obeyed. This one isn't worth killing. Saurfang took 3 steps toward the door, and then he remembered his axe, still lying on the table. Fatigue was catching up to him. With a grunt, he returned for it. Morka, the guard, stepped past Saurfang, her eyes locked onto the messenger. What's your name, errand boy? I am the emissary of my queen, said the messenger. That should be enough for the likes of you. Saurfang's hand closed upon the handle of his axe.
She asked you a question,
he growled.
What is your name?
You have your orders. Outside, High Overlord. How long will you disobey the war chief? The Forsaken asked blandly. Saurfang's jaw clenched hard. He slipped a glance toward Morka and stepped forward.
I do not believe you care a bit for the war chief,
Saurfang said. Not even the most blindly fervent Forsaken would act this way, but someone who was trying to imitate one.
Tell me, Night Elf, what name does Malfurion call you?
The messenger's expression did not shift, but his fingers twitched towards his wrist. That was enough. Saurfang raised its axe and roared,
Draw your blades, assassin, or die running.
Then he charged. The Forsaken disguised creature snatched up his hidden daggers. The tips of his blades drew black trails of faint smoke in the air. Even a scratch would likely prove fatal. As Saurfang swung his axe, the assassin dropped to a knee and sliced at the orc's legs. He must be young, Saurfang thought. Older fighters knew better than to waste one of their chances of survival on a complicated strike. Before the knives could reach him, his boot caught the assassin beneath his shin, lifting him to his feet. The axe struck home, cleaving through his neck and slamming to a stop against his backbone. The disguise vanished, and Saurfang stared into the eyes of the night elf who tried to kill him. He was young, barely more than a boy by night elf standards. Saurfang wrenched his axe free and let the enemy fall. The youth hit the floor with a sickening thud, and the wooden boards became wet with his blood. His eyes still held on to Saurfang's face. Saurfang would remember his expression. It was one of the terrible truths of war. The young died, and the survivors were cursed with remembering how it happened.
Rest easy, Saurfang told him. You died with honor. No one can ask for more.
The elf's face contorted, and for a moment Saurfang believed he was about to cry. But no. With his last breath, the dying rogue spit onto Saurfang's boots, leaving streaks of blood and saliva across his armor. Then he went still. Morka stepped next to Saurfang, a small axe in each of her hands. It had been over too fast for her to use them. Defiant until the end, she noted. His people would be proud. Saurfang agreed.
Such spirit, and I never even learned his name. You did well spotting this assassin,
Saurfang told her.
But he should never have come this far.
He strode outside, snarling. There was siege crews, guards, and soldiers all around. Astronar was swimming with horde, and not one of them had marked the stranger walking through their midst. Not one had challenged him. He would enjoy explaining that to them in excruciating detail.
Listen well,
he began, heads turned toward him. Eyes glanced at the blood on his axe and armor.
Does the Horde need a reminder that we are in war? Does the Horde need...
And then he stopped. His next heartbeat seemed to last an eternity. His fatigued, addled mind had finally caught up with his hard-earned survival instincts. That boy had not been sent to kill him. He had been trying to lead Saurfang outside. In his haste to lecture his guards, Saurfang had done exactly what that boy had wanted. You just killed yourself, you old fool. He turned and flung himself back into the inn. An instant later, the ground shook as Malfurion Stormrage landed where he had been standing.
"Look, Narash!"
he yelled.
"To arms!"
His advisors and technicians were already forming a line in the common room, pulling him behind it and standing at ready. Like many Night Elf buildings, this one had open walls on 3 sides, giving them a view of the chaos rolling outside. Siege crews scrambled away from Malfurion, only to fall from arrows and blades in their back. This wasn't just Malfurion. This was the Kaldorai's last stand in Ashenvale, a decapitation strike on the commander of this battle, and Saurfang. They had drawn him in so easily. Astronar was an island with limited access, easily defensible, impossible to escape. And Saurfang had just taken shelter in a building with few walls to fight an Arch-Druid.
This is the end.
As the sounds of chaos rose outside, the inn darkened. Malfurion Stormage stepped through the doorway, eyes fixed on Saurfang. 3 of the High Overlord's advisors charged him.
"Stop!"
Saurfang shouted. Malfurion moved, and the metallic claws strapped his wrist made short work of the 2 orcs and the Blood Elf. He stepped forward, over their bodies. Morka grabbed Saurfang by the shoulders. "Run, High Overlord," she said. "We will give you time." No, they wouldn't. Not more than a heartbeat. It was time to die with honor.
"Take the maps,"
he whispered.
"Get them to the war chief."
Morka's eyes went wide, but Saurfang turned away, roaring.
"Malfurion Stormrage, I challenge you to Mak'gora."
The words sounded bizarre to his own ears. What use did a Night Elf have for an orcish duel to the death? It didn't matter. Malfurion was here for Saurfang. He would not pursue a bunch of advisors. Saurfang looked at the other Horde soldiers in the inn. Seeing their confusion, he raised his voice even louder.
"Stormrage is mine, you gutless whelps. If you're not out of this inn in 5 seconds, I will kill you myself."
Morka looked furious, but she obeyed. She snatched up the map container and sprinted out of the building. The rest quickly followed. Malfurion's eyes did not leave Saurfang's.
"A duel,
Saurfang?" he asked in a soft voice, soft like the eye of the storm, like the freshly dug soil of a grave. The Arch-Druid stepped forward calmly to where Saurfang waited.
"Do you think I care in the slightest for a duel? You can run if you're afraid,"
Saurfang said. He was buying time. That was all. The only victory Saurfang could hope for was for the latest Horde troop movements to be delivered to Sylvanas' hands so the battle might continue.
"Or fight me and see if I will fall."
Malfurion said nothing. He raised his arms. The inn trembled. The wooden floor and ceiling creaked and groaned. Saurfang's lips pulled back into a snarl. The power of nature was not found in the swing of a fist or the slice of a blade. It was found when a forest was rent to dust by fire and yet returned in only a few years. It was found when a mighty city was claimed by overgrowth after being abandoned for a decade. It was found in 1,000 generations of predator and prey, which lived and hunted by the instincts of their ancestors. In the hands of a druid, that power could be condensed from centuries into a minute. In Malfurion's hands, this inn and everything in it would be returned to the earth in seconds. Saurfang leapt forwards, axe swinging, as vines and roots tore apart the inn. Malfurion stepped clear of his blow effortlessly, and the metal claw strapped to his hand darted towards Saurfang's head. The orc batted them away with his axe shaft, barely. Saurfang roared, his axe whistled, and Malfurion's second strike snaked through a gap in his armor around the shoulder. Blood dripped to the floor. Roots, countless roots, a whole forest of roots grabbed at Saurfang's ankles. He danced away, chopping the plants whenever they tried to snare him. When pieces of the inn started to fall around the orc's head, he accepted his death. Against a creature like Stormage, There was no dishonor in failure. Saurfang simply had to meet his end without surrender. A sudden blast knocked him from his feet, dazing him. Saurfang closed his eyes.
It is done.
His hands went numb, tingling from the dark power that roared through the ruins of the inn. Dark power? Saurfang opened his eyes. Malfurion was not looking at him. His arms were crossed in front of his face as an arrow, wreathed in shades of violet smoke, exploded just before him. Emerald light rose against the darkness, and Malfurion charged to fight Sylvanas Windrunner, who had another arrow knocked and drawn at point-blank range. Saurfang would have leapt to his feet, but his legs wouldn't obey his commands. Then the inn collapsed on top of him. He was surrounded by darkness and pain. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. Death wasn't supposed to hurt this much.
The truly irritating things about night elves, Nathanos grumbled to himself, is that they are far too steadfast.
Most creatures lost a step when the jaws of imminent defeat snapped shut around them. A frightened animal would bolt with unnatural speed, but when the inevitability of death asserted itself, they would slow down. The last bit of comfort they would give themselves was to not die tired. The Kaldorei did not see things that way. Nathanos was forced to hunt down each and every one of them to the bitter end. It had lost its fun a while ago. He returned to Astronar, berating himself. Dozens of night elves, including Malfurion Stormrage, had escaped the village after their assault. Nathanos had only tracked down 2, and he doubted anyone else had gotten a single one. Even Sylvanas would probably return empty-handed. But then, she was tracking the biggest prey after all. He had no excuse. Astronar was no longer in chaos. The wounded were being tended to, the dead were accounted for, and the living had returned to the business of war, albeit a touch shaken. There was nothing quite like facing a creature who commanded the wilds for more than 10,000 years. If nothing else, the ungrateful masses of the Horde will finally give the war chief the respect she has earned. Over and over again, Malfurion had come to crush groups of Horde, and she had intervened. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives had been saved because of her. She had always deserved nothing less than their total devotion. But now, she would also have their regard. It's about time. Several soldiers dug frantically through the rubble of the town's inn, where Saurfang had apparently fallen. If the rumors were true, he had perished in a duel with Stormrage. The rescue was overseen by an orc that Nathanos recognized. She took my dagger from me, he thought with amusement. Did he die well? Nathanos asked. Morka looked up from the rubble with irritation. He was alive last I saw him. Care to help? Her voice had an edge to it. Nathanos wordlessly began lifting rubble away. Whether Saurfang was dead or alive, the Horde needed to move forward, and sentimental types would have trouble doing so until they knew the Higher Overlord's fate. 10 minutes later, someone shouted, "He's alive!" A flurry of hands descended to lift the last few beams and planks of the orc commander, and Saurfang was pulled to his feet to rousing cheers from every soldier in Astronar. The orc was bloody, weary, but clearly alive. Good. I would hate witnessing the death of so thick-headed an orc. Nathanos waited for the healers to assess the damage. A few gashes, some cracked ribs, and a host of bruises, all of which were mended quickly before approaching the High Overlord. Saurfang sat on the rubble, catching his breath, looking down at the ground. "Did you have a good rest?" Nathanos said. Saurfang coughed and snorted.
"Best sleep I've had in days. How goes the battle?"
"You tell me, High Overlord," the Forsaken said. "What is our next move?"
"Did Stormrage get away from you again?"
Saurfang gave him a flat stare. Nathanos stamped down a flash of anger. "After he escaped you?" "Yes." Saurfang spit.
"Then we proceed as planned. What are our scouts telling us? Where are the Night Elves pulling back to?
Morka spoke up. They're leaving Ashenvale. We think they're abandoning this land. A murmur ran through the assembled horde. The soldiers in the central path moved aside. Sylvanas Windrunner had returned, striding straight toward Nathanos. Disappointingly, Malfurion's head was not in her hands. Saurfang raised his voice.
Is it true, War Chief? Have they abandoned this region?
Sylvanas nodded. She spoke to the entire crowd. Ashenvale belongs to the Horde. A roar went up, spreading quickly. The soldiers raised fists and weapons, bellowing cries of victory. Nathanos did not smile. The war was not yet won. Sylvanas turned toward Saurfang. Her voice slipped beneath the din so only Saurfang and Nathanos could hear her. Can you still fight, High Overlord? Are you prepared for the end? Saurfang rapped the flat of his axe against his armor.
I am ready, War Chief. Let us take Darnassus for the Horde.
The Night Elves had completely pulled out of Ashenvale. Once the Horde realized there were no more ambushes, no more traps, and no more enemies, they raced forward. Everyone wanted to be at the front when the time came to assault the World Tree. The promise of glory danced in the mind of every soldier. Saurfang knew it. The army's front lines reached the west coast of Kalimdor within a few hours. Saurfang quickly assessed the terrain. The path from the enchanted forest to Ashenvale bent north into a smaller forest. That path would lead all the way to Darkshore. Resistance would be fierce. The Night Elves had given up on Ashenvale because it offered no more places to make a stand. Here, along the coast, the impassable mountain ranges squeezed the forest into a narrow strip of land. Darnassus' last desperate defense would no doubt happen there. Malfurion would be in charge. The longer the Horde delayed, the more time the Archdruid had to prepare. Saurfang ordered the army to set up a brief staging ground on the open shores near the ruins of Soramgar outpost. The Night Elves would never leave the safety of the trees to attack an exposed space, so the Horde could repair their equipment, eat, drink, rest, and tend to their aches and pains without fear of reprisal.
We are close, Horde,
Saurfang said.
This is your last chance to rest. Be ready. We will take the World Tree before nightfall.
Saurfang and Sylvanas crouched over the map to plan their final moves. They agreed there was no need for complicated maneuvers. Push forward, find the enemy, and deal with them the best as they could.
I will lead the assault,
Saurfang said.
You should stay behind.
That earned him a raised brow from the war chief. Malfurion will be there, High Overlord, she said.
I need him to unleash everything. Stormrage wants my head. He will not hold back. From that, we will see the extent of his defenses, and we can plan how to overcome them.
The corners of Sylvanas' mouth twitched. I will stay on the edge of the forest, if you wish. It was clear she did not expect him to survive. He didn't blame her. There was no shortage of volunteers to accompany Saurfang. Within 10 minutes, he and more than 100 soldiers stepped into the woods to the north, keeping little distance between each other while remaining close enough to fight together. Saurfang gripped his axe tightly, his eyes scanning the trees before him, waiting for Stormrage to show himself. Minutes passed. The Horde moved forward, step by step, silent but for their footfalls on the dirt and leaves. The terrain was not flat, but it was not difficult to traverse. Small creeks cut through the forest, and each time Saurfang crossed one, he expected arrows to whistle toward his head, or roots to snatch his ankles and pull him beneath the water. Neither happened. A few wisps flitted about idly, but they were harmless in small numbers. Most of them stayed up high in the branches. The forest was quiet, still, empty. The Horde soldiers kept glancing upward to inspect the trees, but the canopy wasn't as thick as in Ashenvale. The wisps up there glowed, offering plenty of illumination and banishing the shadows. The Night Elves could not ambush the Horde from there.
There is no chance they'd abandon this place,
Saurfang thought. But that was how it appeared. Before long, he saw the sandy beaches of Darkshore through the trees, and still there was no enemy. He faintly saw movement, night of civilians on the shore, evacuating from the World Tree. A few of them pointed at Saurfang and the Horde, shouting out warnings. Is Malfurion waiting for nightfall? The sun plummeted toward the horizon, but the Horde would have Darkshore long before dark if they faced no resistance. Saurfang's skin crawled. His instincts told him he was walking into a trap, but retreating before it was sprung would gain him nothing. He kept moving forward. We have to force Malfurion to reveal himself. A wisp flew past Saurfang's eyes. He absently waved it away with his left hand. It stung. The wisp seemed to lash out at Saurfang's exposed palm. It darted around and then landed at the top of his scalp, covering his head. Saurfang snarled as the wisp snapped his power onto his skin again. He swatted it away, hard. More wisps floated high in the trees, moving in distress, agitated patterns. Saurfang supposed they didn't like what he had done. Whispered curses and grunts drew his attention. Other Horde members were slapping more wisps away. Saurfang went still. It wasn't unusual for wisps to gather and frolic before sunset, but they were not aggressive. Not normally. But he had seen it happen before, hadn't he? High above Mount Hyal, a demonic lord had strided toward Nordrassil, intending to claim its power for the Burning Legion. Saurfang had fought in that battle, desperately holding back the tides of demons, while Malfurion Stormrage had beckoned for the aid of his ancestors. And thousands, nay, millions of wisps had answered his call. In small numbers, wisps were harmless. In large numbers...
Retreat!
Saurfang bellowed.
Horde! Retreat now! Run!
Most of the Horde soldiers obeyed his command, but many did not recognize the danger and were slow to flee. A voice thundered through the forest, promising vengeance.
Ashkaroth,
said Malfurion Stormrage. The wisp descended from the branches as a solid, writhing, glowing wall. They surrounded the stragglers and the slow runners, embracing them in a cocoon of light from which only screams of agony escaped.
Run!
Saurfang shouted again, and now there was no more hesitation. The Horde fled, dropping weapons and shields and armor, scrambling to safety. None of them had been at Mount Hyal that day, but they all knew the story. Wisps tore at the High Overlord's armor. He covered his head in his arms and ran desperately. The heat of the Wisp's fury, the rage of the Kaldorai's ancestors tried to burn through his armor, to sear the flesh within, to burrow his bones and guts and rip him apart. The power of wisps had destroyed the demonic lord. They would butcher the mortals of the Horde. Saurfang's armored boots were heavy, threatening to catch on roots and rocks in his way. To lose his footing would mean death, but he kept running until he finally escaped the woods and emerged onto the shore. Gasping, he turned back to see how many others would make it. More than 100 Horde had entered the forest. Less than a dozen emerged on the shore near Somragar outpost. The wisps buzzed angrily at the edge of the woods, weaving in erratic patterns, waiting for the Horde to step into their embrace again. They stretched in a solid wall from the shoreline to the mountains. The entire forest to the north was protected. Sylvana stood motionless in the open, watching it all, her expression unreadable. The wisps parted in the center of the forest just a bit, allowing the Horde soldiers to see deep within the woods. There, standing atop a small rise, were Malfurion Stormrage and many other Night Elves.
This ends now,
Malfurion said, his voice carried out of the forest and across the exposed shore.
The Horde will not take a single step farther into our land, not without paying with their lives. This I vow.
The wisps closed ranks, and Malfurion disappeared. Sylvanas did not take her eyes away from where he had been. Saurfang stared for a while, collecting his thoughts. His terror had passed. Now, he considered tactical options. The wisps were going nowhere. They will fall upon any enemy who approached. We cannot cross that line. Not easily. He could fling his entire army into that death trap, but he was not sure the Horde would win. He could order every mage to set fire to the trees, but he was not sure the flames would catch. The wisps might simply circle the fire and dissipate the heat. Siege weapons. That was the answer. Ranged attacks arcing into the trees from a safe distance until Malfurion and his allies were forced to retreat. The Horde held the shore already. All Saurfang needed to do. Alliance! Alliance ships! Southwest! The cry pierced his thoughts, and Saurfang's heart sank. Flashes of weapons fire rippled across the sea. Glaives and cannon shots soared over the water, and explosions rattled across the exposed shoreline, gorging great holes into the ranks of the Horde. The Night Elf fleet had returned. Perhaps the ships had been waiting, just out of sight beyond the edge of the coast, for the Horde to walk into Malfurion's trap. Now they could fire uncontested on the Horde's army. The Night Elves have found their miracle. The Horde could not hold the shore. It would be a slaughter if they did not retreat.
Back to the trees! Back to Ashenvale!
Saurfang called out. His subordinates picked up the cry, and soon the Horde was moving, retreating. Alliance fire chased them all the way into the cover of the forest to the east. Sylvanas did not move. She barely even glanced at the ocean. Saurfang and his guards remained near her at the edge of the northern forest. The fleet would not fire upon them. Not here. Not so close to their departed ancestors. The Night Elves have outmaneuvered us, High Overlord, Sylvanas said. She sounded irritated.
Yes, they have.
We cannot advance into this forest, and we cannot bring our siege weapons onto the shore without losing them, she said. The Alliance reinforcements will arrive before we can break this the hard way. Do you disagree?
No, Warchief.
Saurfang could not imagine a solution that would work, and yes, the hard way would take too long, if it worked at all. Maybe, with some teamwork between Magi, Warlocks, and Shaman, the Horde could force the Wisps back, one tree at a time, and then destroy the tree, eliminating cover inch by inch, but managing it all while under attack from the water? It would take weeks. The Alliance reinforcements would arrive, making it impossible to cross the waters from Darkshore. As it stood, the Night Elves would win this battle. Now the Horde needed a miracle. Sylvanas stepped closer to the Wisps, regarding them carefully. Saurfang ground his teeth but said nothing. She faced down the wall of swarming light as though it were Malfurion himself, and perhaps that was not inaccurate. Sylvanas spun around. I am prepared to duel Malfurion alone. Saurfang wasn't sure he had ever heard a worse idea, not with the circumstances this dire.
Warchief,
she cut him off. I know. I would be facing him, his remaining army, and the spirits of his ancestors by myself. That will be difficult to overcome, she said dryly. But we almost have them. I will not retreat. The Night Elven ships fired again. Shots landed close by, explosions sending geysers of sand leaping into the air. A few of Saurfang's guards flinched. Sylvanas didn't. Neither did Saurfang. They're just testing their range, he knew.
Wisps are dangerous only in large numbers,
Saurfang said.
Can you kill them, Warchief? Enough of them.
Sylvanas eyed the wisps for a moment. She then shook her head. Not enough to matter. We can disperse them. Take anyone you need, Saurfang, and go into Felwood. Find a path over the mountains into Darkshore, and sweep into this forest from the rear. When I hear the attack begin, I will lead the remainder of the Horde through the front. We will squeeze Malfurion from both sides. He will fall today.
Warchief, there is no route through Felwood,
Saurfang said. Find one or make one, she responded coldly. Leave the siege weapons under my command, along with any of your guards who can swim.
Swim?
Saurfang said. I will need them to deal with the fleet, she said.
How many smugglers do you know?
Saurfang asked. Nathanos narrowed his eyes. I beg your pardon?
The war chief has commanded us to find a route over the mountains in Felwood.
Saurfang removed his armor and splashed water on his face before downing an entire water skin. It was going to be a hard journey.
There's a road to Winterspring up there. Unless I'm supposed to believe that the black market ships and all their cargo are going through Azeroth. Though, with Galovix in charge, that wouldn't surprise me. Then there has to be a hidden route somewhere in Felwood. Somewhere with access to Darkshore, away from the eyes of the Kaldoroi.
Most smugglers do not advertise, Nathanos said. And they will not want the attention of the High Overlord.
These are the war chief's orders, Blight Caller,
Saurfang snarled.
All we need is one smuggler more loyal to the Horde than their prophets. Do you truly know of nobody who can help?
I know somebody, Nathanos said curtly.
Find them and bring them.
Saurfang turned towards his guards.
Who among you can swim well?
Almost all of them raised their hands. I want to accompany you, High Overlord. He shook his head and pulled his armor back on.
I need speed, not protection. And the war chief needs swimmers. Follow her orders and I will see you all when the battle is done.
Saurfang hopped into the saddle of a timber wolf and took the reins. Many other riders scrambled to prepare for the journey.
Felwood will not be friendly to us,
he told them.
But we succeed, or the Horde will know defeat. Let's ride.
He dug his heels into the wolf's ribs. The beast lurched forward, racing towards Ashenvale. Nathanos cursed, furious at being left behind. Saurfang felt not a whit of sympathy. He'll catch up. If there's one thing Nathanos would never do, it was to let down his war chief. The line of riders stretched out behind Saurfang. The dust they kicked up hung in the air, dimming the falling sun. Twilight came. Sylvanas remained close to the forest, only a few steps away from the swarm of the wisps. They shivered and spun among the trees, agitated at her presence. She could feel their hatred, their rage. Even these gentle spirits of fallen Kaldoroi loathed Sylvanas for what she was. She let their hate wash over her. It was as sweet as nectar, knowing that they despised her so. They would love to rip her to shreds, but they would have to dart out into the open to do that, and that would make them vulnerable. Even after death, these creatures still clung to existence. She understood that impulse perfectly. One of the wisps spun anxiously, jittering with fury. Sylvanas turned a smile toward it. "Stop me, if you can," she whispered. The wisp sprang forward alone, whirling straight toward the warchief's head. She caught it between her hands, and the spirit shrieked with panic, writhing and struggling. Sylvanas held it up before her eyes, studying it closely. "You wish to defend the living?" she asked. The wisp's light flickered with terror. "Is that all you can dream of now? To protect your descendants?" She cupped her hand over it, trapping it between her palms. It bounced against her hands, trying to escape. "You did a poor job of it in life. Why would death be any different?" She squeezed, and the spirit's power crackled and vanished. When she opened her hands, only blackened dust remained. She wiped off her palms and turned back to the forest. "Soon, Malfurion. Soon." The Night Elf ships fired again, though not at any particular target. The shots landed on empty shorelines, killing nothing but a few crawlers. It was intimidation and little more. The Horde's scout had used their spyglasses to give Sylvanas the information she needed. The ships were fully crewed, including a complement of archers on a few vessels, and well stocked for an extended mission in southern Kalimdor. The same thing would be to bombard the vessels with artillery until they retreated. Unfortunately, she would lose almost every siege weapon at her command. Sylvanas would give that order only as a last resort. For now, she did nothing. They could sit out there, firing on the shorelines, and she could wait. She would use the time to prepare the next stage of this battle. The final stage. One way or the other. She returned to the army inside the eastern forests. Soldiers of the Horde, listen carefully. You will be outnumbered. You will be outarmed. They will kill every one of you if you're spotted. Even if they do not, your fellow Horde soldiers may do the job for them and slay you by accident. Sylvanas had told them, and then she had smiled. Now, how many of you would like to volunteer? Everyone gathered before her had raised her hand, including Morka. What a story this will make for my children, she thought. Even if she did not survive, they would sing songs about everyone who took part in this raid. She was certain of it. Very well, Sylvanas had said. Siege crews, stay under cover until you see me enter the northern forest. Only then you will roll out onto the sand and begin your bombardment. Raiders, begin your swim the moment Saurfang launches his attack. As ordered, the volunteers had organized themselves into small groups, 15 per ship. That was how it would shake out. Against a full Calderai crew, each group would indeed be outnumbered, but the goal was not to win in a fair fight. Oh no. Sylvanas had assigned Magi to each siege crew. When the Horde fired back, they would do so with unstable, explosive, arcane-touched payloads that could set entire ships ablaze. Morka stripped off her armor and kept only a couple of small daggers lashed within her leather belt. She would swim beneath the artillery barrage to eliminate the ships the Horde's siege engines could not reach. Or even better, Morka thought, to take the ships for the Horde. War Chief approved piracy. Was there anything better? Nathanos' irritation faded long before he caught up with Saurfang. He clung tightly to the reins of the Darkspear Raptor as it raced through Fellwood. The beast huffed with each step, but it had kept its pace all through Ashenvale, even with 2 riders on its back. The other passenger, a troll named Rejeji, had grumbled the entire ride. We wanted more action than this, he said again and again. Finally, Nathanos spotted Saurfang's large group of soldiers on the path ahead. The raptor skidded to a stop, and Rejeji was thrown off its back, landing hard on the ground. Nathanos nimbly leapt off the raptor, checking on the troll. It would have been just perfect to have the Horde's source of information break his neck in a stupid accident, but Rejeji jumped to his feet, skin flushed with embarrassment. Saurfang pretended he had not seen the mishaps.
Nathanos, we have not been able to find a route on our own. Have you brought an answer to the Horde's problems?
I have, Nathanos said, gesturing toward the troll. This one had close dealings with the Shatterspear tribe. Saurfang's brow furrowed.
Shatterspear.
Used to be living near Darkshore, Rejeji said, brushing off the dirt of his cloak. Fled after the cataclysm.
And there is a path connecting Fellwood and Darkshore?
Saurfang asked. Rejeji lifted his chin. So I be hearing. Many be escaping along it. No easy journey, but I hear we be taking anything we can get.
You heard correctly.
Saurfang gave Nathanos a suspicious glare.
But you've never walked the path yourself?
No, High Overlord, the troll said.
Can you find it?
The troll shrugged. Probably. By midday, Saurfang was exhausted. The troll hadn't lied about the journey's difficulty. The route to Darkshore wasn't much a path as a cliff, but the steep rocks and soil had enough handholds to allow the Horde troops to scramble up the mountain and lower themselves down on the other side. They had to leave their mounts behind, but that wasn't unexpected. Most of the soldiers had managed to climb safely. Several had slipped and would have to ride back through Fellwood nursing broken bones. Rejeji had scaled the route as though he had done it 1,000 times before. He probably has, Saurfang thought. He wasn't angry at being lied to. Nathanos was right. No smuggler would want to admit they were to the High Overlord. If the troll wanted to pretend he had picked up this knowledge from the Shatterspear refugees, Saurfang would play along, even if the system of ropes and pulleys gathered along the way marked the path as a smuggler's route. Once they cleared the mountain peak, Saurfang got his first unobstructed view of Darkshore in a long time. He could see all the way north to the World Tree and very nearly all the way south to where the Horde was currently stymied. Beneath the mountains, on Darkshore, Night Elf civilians miled around the beaches. They had all taken small boats from Darnassus, and they looked as if though they were looking for larger, passenger-bearing vessels for a long journey. Saurfang pointed out the small boats to Nathanos. They were only lightly guarded. They would be destroyed the moment the Night Elves understood that the battle was truly lost.
Once we reach the shore, secure those,
he said quietly.
They will be useful when we take the tree.
He half expected Nathanos to argue, but the Forsaken agreed. I want to be in the first assault on Darnassus, he said.
Fine,
Saurfang replied.
We'll wait for the war chief to join us.
He could see the remainder of the Night Elf's army, scattered among the trees guarding Malfurion Stormrage, who stood atop a hill in the center of the forest. There were no wisps near him. They were all on the front lines, holding off the bulk of the Horde's forces. Saurfang and the others silently crawled down the wreckage to the Shatterspear encampment, which had been abandoned but for a large family of foxes that hid the moment they saw the Horde approach.
You know what to do,
he whispered to his troops.
You know the goal.
He peeked over the edge of a rise, looking at the unsuspecting Kaldorei.
We take the shore, we take the forest, and then we take Darnassus.
Saurfang leapt over the hill and charged down. Nathanos and the rest and the hundreds of Horde who had followed the High Overlord over the mountains kept pace, echoing his war cry.
For the Horde!
Sylvanas smiled. The wisps were flickering. They looked confused, indecisive. Some of them left the front and raced back into the trees. An unmistakable cry echoed through the forest.
For the Horde!
The flanking attack had begun. Excellent work, Saurfang. It was time. Sylvanas stepped into a cluster of wisps. She reached out searching for those tiny motes of life that were the spirits of the Kaldorei's ancestors. Before they could attack, she unleashed her power. The pain and the horror of the terrible gifts the Lich King had given her escaped through her mouth in a shriek, and dark smoke radiated from her. The wisps fell all around her, winging softly with their futile attempts to cling to life, like snowflakes caught in the rays of sunrise. The Horde roared their battle cries and charged into the forest behind her, clubs and blades at the ready. Sylvanas knocked an arrow and strode through the forest. No more wisps approached her. The Horde soldiers swung their clubs and the flat of their blades, swapping the wisps out of the air. A few flickered and disappeared. Many simply fled. Malfurion knows it's over. He had decided to spare his ancestors from their inevitable end at the hands of the Horde. Soon enough, she saw him, waiting for her. The other Horde gave him a wide berth, but she strode toward him without hesitation. Malfurion Stormrage looked sorrowful.
There will be no forgiveness for this, Sylvanas.
I know, she replied. And then the time for talking had passed. Loktar Ogar, she thought, unable to surpass a sharp grin. Behind her, on the shores, her siege weapons fired their payloads. Then came the explosions, both on shore and far out to sea. Morka came up for breath and emerged into a whirl of fire. The warchief wasn't kidding, she thought, fighting back panic. Someone could get hurt out here. The Horde's siege engines launched fiery barrages into the sea, their arcane-touched payloads spreading fire around the Night Elf's fleet. In return, the ships unleashed volleys of cannon shots and glaives onto the shore. Morka's group of raiders swam past the front lines of the fleet, surfacing only to take quick breaths every few strokes. Soon it became dangerous to surface at all. The siege weapon's magic-laced shots were lethal even in water, fire blooming outward, stubbornly burning as though the ocean were as flammable as a drought-ravaged forest. The raiders had been forced to swim beneath the flames for almost a full minute before they found a clear patch of water. Morka's raiding party surfaced near her, gasping for breath. Morka did the count in her head. 11, 12, 14. Nobody was missing. That was close to a miracle. A Tauren had surfaced last. He seemed to spit off half the ocean before regaining his composure. He turned an evil eye toward her. We're past the fleet now, he snarled. You're welcome to swim back, she retorted. Then she looked closely at him. Don't I know you? He snorted, accidentally inhaling a bit of water in doing so. It took a moment for his coughing fit to end. We shared a few drinks in Orgrimmar not too long ago. Oh. Oh! What was his name? Lanagu? Something like that. She made her best guess. Are you ready, Lanagas? He looked confused. My name is Siamo. I'm terrible with names. Ready? He nodded. The others had gathered around. Morka made a few last strokes to the Night Elven ships and climbed aside, using small gaps in the wooden planks as fingerholds until she reached the cannon ports. Morka peeked into a port. She was on the seaward side of the ship. Inside, the Kelderai crew loaded and fired cannons and glaive throwers, and through the portholes opposite, she could see other ships on fire and sinking. The ship had been untouched, though. The Horde siege engines had target vessels closer to the shore first. Nobody was manning the cannons on this side. Nobody was even paying attention. After all, why would attackers approach from the ocean? Hiamo gripped the same cannon port and glanced inside. What do you think? He whispered. Morka waited for a few others to join them. An idea was forming. I see a couple choices. We could set a few fires, jump back into the water, and swim to shores underneath the half-mile of flames, she said. A blood elf raised a brow at her. Or anyone care to sail to Darkshore instead? She saw every Horde face grinning back at her. Saurfang stalked openly through the forest. The Kelderai had tried to defend in two directions, and their last stand had crumbled. Their battle lines had broken. Their ranks had shattered. Now the survivors were doing the last desperate act a losing army could do, bunching up into small groups and defending against all sides until they were brought down. Saurfang believed he had seen one of the Night Elf's ranking officers fight on despite being hit with several arrows. Brave, honorable, and hopeless. Saurfang fought anyone in his way, but there were fewer and fewer elves left standing. He followed the sounds of a terrifying battle. Near the shore was a monstrous clash between two powerful creatures. The Warchief battles Stormrage alone. If Sylvanas fell, it would be up to Saurfang to finish the job. He was not sure he could. The fighting was still hundreds of feet away. Saurfang crept toward it, watching flashes of dark violet and emerald green ahead. There was a tremendous explosion of darkness and then a rising sound of collapsing trees. Saurfang ducked behind a cover as an object flew through the air, bouncing off tree trunks before slamming to a halt in the dirt only 30 feet away. The object raised his head. His head. Saurfang saw antlers. Without thinking, he threw his axe. The moment it left his hand, he wanted to call it back. That was Malfurion's Stormrage, alive and preparing to rejoin the fight against the Warchief. The axe flipped end over end, crossing the distance in a second. Malfurion did not sense it, not until it was buried deep in his back. Malfurion staggered, lifted his eyes to the night sky and let out a breath. He collapsed. Saurfang's axe handle stood at an angle, embedded in the elf's flesh. Saurfang felt no elation, only horror. This was wrong. This was shameful. War was war, but Saurfang had lost a duel with Stormrage, and now he had struck him down from behind. A dishonorable blow, Saurfang thought numbly. He is a hero of 10,000 years of war. I once fought at his side, and now I felled him like a coward. Saurfang did not want to look upon what he had done, but he forced himself to. Malfurion lay on his stomach, bleeding, breathing shallow, rattling breaths.
I'm sorry,
Saurfang told him.
Do not be.
Saurfang turned. Sylvanas stood next to him, smiling contently. You did well.
I did not mean to interfere,
Saurfang said. I was having trouble finishing him. He was wasting my time. Sylvanas ripped the axe free from Stormrage. The Night Elf grunted with pain and blood gushed out of the wound, but he made no other sound.
Finish him and be done with it,
Saurfang said quietly. Sylvanas hefted his axe, considering it. Then she looked back at Saurfang. He could not read her expression, but he did not like it. She handed the axe back to him. I leave it to you, High Overlord.
This was your fight.
She was already walking away. This is your victory. None of this, not this battle, not Malfurion's defeat, would have happened without you. You have earned this honor. Take a moment if you like, and then take his head. I will meet you in Darkshore. And with that, she disappeared over the rise to the north. Saurfang felt numb.
You have earned this honor.
He looked down at Malfurion again.
I truly am sorry.
Malfurion turned his head. One eye looked up at Saurfang. He rasped.
You have led your horde in service of death. You will regret this day until you die. You fought well, Malfurion,
Saurfang said.
Rest in honor. You deserve it.
He lifted his axe and hesitated. Seconds passed, then whole minutes, and Saurfang could not bring it down. He felt light and warmth shine upon him from above. It held sorrow, hope, and love. Perhaps this was Elune welcoming Malfurion to the next life. Perhaps that made this acceptable.
But this kill is not mine.
Perhaps it would become honorable to let Stormrage live.
In Sylvanas' care,
it is more merciful to end him now. His axe did not move, and then, very suddenly, he could not move at all. Bright light enveloped Saurfang, paralyzing him, making it impossible to twitch a muscle. A mighty blow slammed into his head, throwing him 5 paces away. He hit the ground hard. The wind left his lungs in a single rush as he tumbled to a painful stop. When he looked up, he saw the light of Elune, in all its fury and beauty. Tyrande Whisperwind. She stood over her mate, arms raised, white dress rippling in the soft breeze. A dozen points of Elune's light hovered over Saurfang's head, poised for a final blow. The orc did not move. His head was ringing. Those daggers of light trembled above him. Struck down by the power of justice? It felt appropriate. But just as he had hesitated, so did she. Tyrande knelt slowly, not taking her eyes off Saurfang while she laid a hand on Malfurion. The ground itself seemed to glow as she used her power to stem his bleeding, repair his injuries, and drag him back from the brink of death. After a few moments, she stood. You did not kill him. Why? Saurfang decided to tell the truth.
I struck without honor. I did not deserve to end him.
The answer only seemed to enrage her. This whole war is without honor. What is wrong with you? How dare you spill so much blood for nothing?
We dare because we must,
Saurfang said.
And we must succeed.
Tyrande's face grew dark. The points of light above his head went still, aiming true at his neck. The Horde will win this battle, Saurfang, but we will reclaim our home.
Perhaps,
Saurfang said. You spared Malfurion, so I will give you a choice, Tyrande said. You can die trying to stop me from taking him away, or you stay there, lying in the dirt, and live.
That was fair,
Saurfang grunted.
You have the same choice. You can take him back to Darnassus and both of you will fall when we conquer it, or you can take him far away from here, and you will both live.
She said nothing. Her free hand pronounced a white stone with glowing blue markings. A few moments later, both she and Malfurion had vanished. Saurfang blinked. Where had they gone? For their sake, he hoped it was not Darnassus. He stood and brushed the dirt of his armor, shrugging away his aches and pains. Malfurion would recover, and when he returned to battle, he would make the Horde pay in blood. Saurfang was certain of it. Still, a great burden had been lifted from his soul. It felt right that Malfurion had survived. It felt honorable. The Night Elf crew had outnumbered about 24. About half had died in the initial fighting, and Morka counted 5 who had jumped overboard once the battle had started to turn. 7 Night Elves surrendered. Most were wounded, and all of them stared hatefully at the Horde soldiers who celebrated their victory on the ship. What are we going to do with them? Hayamo asked, lazily twirling one of the Night Elf's spears in his huge hands. Morka gave the prisoners, her prisoners, a quick glance. First things first. We tell our friends to stop shooting at us, she said. Someone take down the flag. A goblin scampered to the mast and lowered the flag of the Kaldrai. They had no Horde flags to raise in its place, but the message was clear enough. They could hear faint cheering from the shoreline. A spyglass rolled freely on the blood-smeared deck, and Morka picked it up. She extended it in a full length and swung it in an arc across the battlefield, looking at the other Night Elven ships. A few ships burning. Another one to the south captured. The rest are all running away. Morka snapped the spyglass closed and smiled at the others. Victory for the Horde! For the Horde! The others shouted back. Morka knelt by one of the wounded Night Elves. He had a gash in his left forearm and was stemming the bleeding with his right hand. Tell me, Kaldrai, she said, can you swim with that injury? No, he said. Then I suppose you need to stay on this ship, she said lightly. You and your friends know how to sail, yes? He said nothing. She nodded as if he had said yes. That is fantastic news, because me and my friends don't. Care to help us sail back to Teldrassil? He spat on the deck. Several of the Horde laughed. Morka leaned in close, offering her most insincere smile. You earn your place on my ship by being useful. Yamo, is the ocean still on fire? She asked the question without looking away. The Tauren bellowed back in a singing voice. Yes, it is so, Captain. Make your choice, Kaldrai. Be useful or start swimming. Raising her voice, she added, That goes for the rest of you, too. No one chose the ocean. In a few minutes, the ship lurched north. It was not smooth sailing. The Night Elves were reluctant to help. Through the spyglass, Morka saw the siege engines were on the move toward Darkshore, traveling faster than the ship. She didn't care. Morka held the ship's helm and steered with a grin on her face. She could get used to this. And soon, she would have a front row seat to the Horde's greatest victory. The sentinels were not surrendering. Even as a tide of horde flooded Darkshore, they fought on, trading their lives to give the civilians of Teldrassil every chance to evacuate. Sylvanas had no objection. More dead enemies? Fewer prisoners? They were doing her a favor. She stood away from the front lines, bow slung across her back. The fight was won, but not finished. Her horde swarmed over the beach carefully. Victory was within reach, across a short expanse of calm ocean. None wanted to fall now. Nathanos stepped out of the fray, behind the front lines. Sylvanas caught his eye and raised a brow. He approached, absently cleaning blood of his short blades. "Where is Sourfang?" "Taking a trophy from his biggest prize of the battlefield," she said. His eyes widened. "He killed Malfurion?" "How do you think the Kaldrai will take it?" Sylvanas asked. "Their legendary leader, the one who guided them through 10,000 years of trials and terrors, killed by an orc with an axe." "Badly, I would imagine." "So would I," she said. Nathanos looked past her. His eyes narrowed. "There he is, Warchief. I see no trophy." Sylvanas turned. Sourfang was indeed striding out of the forest, head held high and hands empty. She felt a hint of irritation. Perhaps he had done something foolish, like burning the body so no trophy could be taken. He looked far too content now, considering how distraught he had been. "Where is Malfurion's head, High Overlord?"
"Attached to his body, as far as I know,"
he said. She was not amused. "And where is that?" Sourfang met her eyes without flinching.
"Stormwind, I guess. Durande intervened and took him away."
It wasn't often Sylvanas was left speechless. It didn't last long. "Malfurion lives?" she snarled. "You let him escape?" His lips did not smile, but his eyes did. He was happy about this.
"I could not stop Durande. Perhaps you could have."
"Perhaps I made a mistake in trusting you," Sylvanas shot back. Her hands twitched toward her bow. "No, not yet," she decided. Nathanos was at her side, his words cold and biting. "How many horde lives will Stormrage take in vengeance, Sourfang? Their blood will be on your hands."
"I will deal with that when it comes,"
Sourfang said simply. Nathanos stepped forward, chest to chest with Sourfang. "You deal with me. Perhaps for every drop of blood Malfurion spills, I will collect from you. Even if I have to, enough!" "What is done, Sylvanas said. "This battle is not finished." She walked away from them. Shortly, she heard footsteps on the sand behind her. Her champion and the High Overlord were following her, blessedly holding their tongues. She could imagine their expressions. Sourfang at peace, Nathanos seething, but she did not want them to see hers. Not until her rage had cooled. She needed to think. "Malfurion will live." Sylvanas could scarcely believe it. She took the bow off her back, drew an arrow, and fired. The arrow arced across the horde and slammed into the back of a sentinel leader. The night elf was still fighting hard, even with the other arrow shafts buried in her body. Sylvanas' blow finally made her fall. With that, the last flickering of the real resistance on Darkshore collapsed. She put her bow away again. This battle was not about a piece of land. Even Sourfang knew that. Taking the World Tree was a way to inflict a wound that could never heal. Losing their homes and their leaders would have ended the Kaldrai as a nation, if not a people. Even the loss of one leader could have been enough to create a tide of despair. The wounds of this battle would have bled, festered, decayed, and rotted the Alliance from the inside out. Anduin Rin would have lashed out in a final, desperate war, looking for a miracle, because only a miracle would save them. But a miracle already had. A miracle granted by the honorable hand of a foolish orc. An overconfident war chief. Best to lay blame where it belonged. This was her mistake as much as it was Saurfang's. This conquest of Darnassus would rattle the Kaldrai people. They would grieve for their lost, fear for their imprisoned, and tremble at the thought of the horde ransacking their homes. But they would not fall to despair. Not anymore. Malfurion's impossible survival would give them hope. Their wound would heal. Even in this dark hour, they would say, Elune still watches over us. And that was almost certainly true, wasn't it? Elune had intervened. Perhaps she had even stayed Saurfang's killing blow. And she wouldn't be the only force beyond the Alliance to oppose Sylvanas' true objective. Sylvanas' anger grew cold. She had known this would happen. It had simply come sooner than expected. That was all. She strode toward the shoreline, ignoring the last few skirmishes and the wailing of those unfortunate Kaldrai who had been unable to escape Darkshore. She studied the shape of Teldrassil towering above her in the moonlight. Soon, it would be in the hands of the horde. "Secure the beach," Sylvanas said. "Prepare to invade the tree." A wound that cannot heal. Sylvanas needed to think of a new way to inflict one. There was no turning back. "Why?" The voice drew Sylvanas' attention from the tree. It had come from a mortally wounded sentinel, the very one who Sylvanas had felled only minutes ago. She was coughing, weak, dying. "Why? You have already won," the Night Elf said, struggling to force the words out. "Only innocents remain in the tree." That was good to know, if it was true. Sylvanas knelt next to her. "This is war," she said. Saurfang and Nathanos were already discussing logistics for the next step of the battle. She let him talk. Before her was an elf who was dying for her people. She rather reminded Sylvanas of herself. Saurfang issued orders rapidly. He organized the siege crews on the beach and made sure they aimed toward Teldrassil. Scouts undoubtedly watched the horde from the top of the World Tree. He wanted them to report that the horde might open fire at any moment. He glanced over at his war chief. Sylvanas was kneeling next to a dying Night Elf commander. An impromptu interrogation, Saurfang guessed. Hopefully she extracts something useful. Nathanos conversed quietly with a few soldiers who had some experience at sea, ordering them to sweep the shoreline for every Night Elven boat and dinghy they could find.
"You may join the first wave, Nathanos,"
Saurfang said. The undead's eyes glowered from beneath his hood. "I do not need your permission. I have a list from the war chief. Sights I would like to see. People I would like to meet." Too bad for them, Saurfang thought, ignoring Nathanos' smoldering contempt. An odd sight at sea caught his eye. 2 Night Elven ships sailing very close to the shoreline.
"What is that?"
Nathanos squinted. "No Night Elf flags. We might have captured them. The war chief said it was possible." Yes. Saurfang could see the faint outline of a green-skinned orc at the helm of one of them. He raised his axe high above his head. The orc waved back. Saurfang concealed his laughter.
"That might make things very easy for us, Blightcaller," he said. "How many can you fit on each of those ships?"
Nathanos showed teeth. "A lot."
"Find anyone who knows how to sail. Looks like they'll need the help. Then select your assault team."
Saurfang visualized assault in his mind. There was still much to prepare for. He needed raiders up front, support forces close behind, maybe a few windriders to guard the air between Darkshore and Darnassus. Some of his best soldiers were exhausted after the battle on Darkshore. They would be disappointed to be left behind, but fresh troops would be more useful in the critical first wave, just in case the Night Elves resisted. I wonder if we have enough time. Burn it! The war chief's words cut through Saurfang's thoughts. He stared at her. Burn what? Nathanos looked just as confused. They exchanged glances. Sylvanas faced them with white-hot anger in her eyes. She shouted the order again, past Saurfang. Burn it! Nathanos turned without a word and motioned to the siege crews. It happened fast. Faster than Saurfang could comprehend. A troll mage spread fire across the payloads, and with a pull of a lever on half a dozen siege engines, the horde flung death into the air. No, Saurfang whispered. He watched, speechless, as fire arced across the ocean. Every single payload hit its target. Orange flames began to spread across Teldrassil. Silence fell over the horde. Even the cries of the captured Night Elves vanished. Everyone watched in disbelief. No, Saurfang whispered again, louder. A second volley launched, and that broke the shock that had paralyzed him.
No!
He roared.
Stop firing! Stop!
It was too late. The second barrage hit, and within moments, the lower half of the world tree was engulfed in flames. The fire moved as if it were alive, climbing the tree, scrambling toward the city in the heights of its branches.
Why? Why?
Saurfang breathed. He looked again at Nathanos. The Forsaken's eyes were wider than the orc had ever seen. Sylvanas had her back to Saurfang, watching the fire spread. Saurfang desperately tried to rationalize her order.
Did that dying elf tell her something? Were they planning to resist? Is the Alliance about to arrive with reinforcements?
A dozen different explanations rushed through his mind. They all died quickly. There were no sails on the horizon. A couple of Calderite ships were frantically moving away from the world tree as burning branches rained down upon them. Even the captured ships were awkwardly steering out of the way. They had not expected this. Nobody had.
What about Sylvanas?
That thought struck Saurfang cold.
Was this her plan all along?
No. It couldn't have been. She had a strategy in mind. Conquering the world tree, taking it intact, would have been a brilliant move. Destroying it was madness. The entire tree was now engulfed in flames. Shimmers of blue and white grew and faded as the fire burned hotter and hotter. The edge of the fire circled around the tree, and then the city of Darnassus began to burn. Saurfang heard screams. The heat reached across the water, along with the terrible smell of an uncontrolled wildfire. The captured Night Elves on Darkshore shrieked and wailed, now begging and pleading for the horde to rush into the tree to save their families from certain death. The sounds washed together, a symphony of horrors. Men, women, children. The fire would not care. Fire had no honor, no reason, only the urge to consume until there was nothing left. Everyone still in Darnassus would die, and with them, every hope the Horde had of winning a clean war against the Alliance. Teldrassil was supposed to be the wedge that would destroy Stormwind. Now, It would be the Alliance rallying cry until every nation of the Horde was rent to dust. Anduin Wrynn would declare war immediately, and every one of his allies would answer his call. The Alliance would stop at nothing in their search for vengeance.
There is no honor in this,
he roared at Sylvanas. She finally turned away from the World Tree. Her eyes were steady, the anger within them gone. What was left in his place? Emptiness? Satisfaction? Saurfang couldn't read her now. Maybe he never could.
They will come for us now. All of them,
he said. I know. She was calm, as though nothing were wrong. They will attack the Undercity in retaliation. You will need to plan our defenses. Begin evacuating my people. He struggled to form words. Finally, pure hatred made him spit out a condemnation.
You have damned the Horde for 1,000 generations. All of us. And for what? For what?
Her expression didn't waver. This was your battle, your strategy, and your failure. Darnassus was never the prize. It was a wedge that would split the Alliance apart. It was the weapon that would destroy hope. And you, my master strategist, gave that up to spare an enemy you defeated. I have taken it back. When they come for us, they will do so in pain, not in glory. And that may be our only chance at victory now. He wanted to kill her. He wanted to declare Mak'gora and spill her blood in front of the Horde and the Alliance alike. But she was right. A wound that can never heal. That had always been the plan, and Saurfang had failed to inflict it. The story of Malfurion's miraculous survival would have spread among the armies of the Alliance as proof as they were blessed in their cause. War would still have come. That had been certain the moment Saurfang had led the Horde into Ashenvale, and it would have been what he had feared the most. The meat grinder. Spending so many lives to achieve so little, ending with a whimper, and thus dooming future generations to a war nobody could win. Once again, Sylvanas had seen it before he had. And so, she had sent a message. This was not a war that could end in a stalemate. Not now. The Alliance and the Horde would both understand that the only choices were victory or death. Loktar or Gar. Darnassus would not be the last city to burn. The loss of lives on both sides would tower over this atrocity, and it would all rest on his shoulders. Every moment would be a nightmare. Sylvanas turned back to the World Tree, watching it burn. Saurfang made himself watch the flames consume city and citizens alike. He would not dishonor himself further by turning away. The screams continued. They reminded him of Shathrath. He had loved the sound then. Smoke filled the air, reminding him of Stormwind, of racing through the streets as buildings burned all around him, finding cowering humans and butchering them as they begged for their lives. He had loved the slaughter then. And he had loved this war too. Hadn't he? Saurfang did not move for hours, not until the screams faded and the flames had burned themselves down to embers. Before him stood a smoking husk that had once been a great civilization. Inside him was a feeling of despair, a feeling of shame. There was no haze of corruption now to soften the horror. Saurfang would remember this moment in his dreams forever. He would relive this shame, and all the new ones to come, over and over again.
You have led your horde in the service of death,
Malfurion had said. How could Saurfang face the soldiers he had led into this war? How could he explain what they had done? He couldn't. He would never know how. The burden would be his. always, until his dying day. As Saurfang turned away, he hoped that that day would come soon.